Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to video game news for Monday, September 30th. Let's see, I just want to double check and make sure everything is working correctly, make sure I have enough free space on my hard drive. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a duelist survey. Yeah, I think we've mostly got everything where it's supposed to be. So, yeah, I don't know if I have really too much to catch up on for today. Over the weekend, I played a lot of Punch Club, but I'm still running into this medium emergency just interrupting my life, and so there was at least one episode that was just abruptly, rudely interrupted. These live streams have been interrupted by my alarm going off and me having to go check on things several times in the past month, 2 or 3. Yeah, and it's just wearing on me in general. Clearly, I'm tired of it and ready for it to just be over. And there's really no guarantee it will be over anytime soon. Which echoes, I guess, Punch Club somewhat too, in that I think I'm up to like episode 17 with Punch Club, and as a management game, while it is much more playable than Surviving Mars was, which was way too complicated, Punch Club is much simpler. It runs into the danger of just being on the other side of that spectrum of being too simple, because inherently I've hit this difficulty plateau in that to get to the middle part, to get to the second act of the game, it seems like I'm just going to have to constantly, for several weeks, just work a job to get money to buy food. There's nothing else left for me to buy, while also taking on as many fights as possible to get skill upgrade points. Even if you lose the fights, you get skill upgrade points, but it's not a lot, and the cost to upgrade each skill goes up by 1 each time. So the next upgrade I'm going to do is going to cost like 22 points. Next one will be 23, 24. You're getting 2 when you lose a fight. You get maybe 7 when you win a fight. It doesn't seem like it really scales. On top of all of that, you're working a job to find foods to keep your energy up, but then you also need to constantly work out, because if you're not constantly working out, your skills fall down every day. And I think that's really the problem with Punch Club, is that I'm playing on normal, and you just have to maintain, and it doesn't get any easier to maintain your stats. There is, if you get enough upgrades, a way to make a floor of your stats, and I've gotten that point, so my strength cannot go below 4 and my stamina can't go below 4, but it takes a lot of upgrades just to get to that, and it would take a lot more upgrades to make it so it can't go below 8 for strength and stamina, and you have to do that before you take a perk that would then make it so your agility doesn't go below 8. And my build is based on agility, and that's another major problem with Punch Club, is at the very beginning of the game it asks you, do you want to focus on stamina, agility, or strength? Whatever you pick there puts you on the path of a very different playthrough experience from any other person who plays. Maybe it even offered a way where you could have kept it balanced, and if that was the case, you probably should have kept it balanced. But I'm still not 100% sure that even if you were to get all of the skills unlocked in the game, if you aren't going to, if that was capable of being done in a reasonable amount of time, which I don't think it really is, I'm still not sure that you aren't still going to run into a lot of randomness and struggle on some of the boxing fights. Kickboxing, they don't really explain what kind of fighting it is. It's probably kickboxing is the best way to describe it, but it's definitely not a MMA in the cell type experience. And yeah, once again, I'm very uninterested in the most currently played games. Let's just go down the list here and see what games have caught my interest worth mentioning. The fact that there still is a large number of people playing Black Myth Wukong, considering how I think that is mostly a single player game, is intriguing. But I do think that at the 6 week to 6 month point, after that launch window happens, we'll see the numbers drop really low. Naraka Blade Point, I think, is having a crossover event. GTA is just always high. Satisfactory came into version 1.0. I did see another YouTuber playing with their friends, and perhaps, much like Minecraft, if you're playing with your friends, the annoying automation and numbers just going really high of Satisfactory might be a little bit more manageable. But inherently, if I find the main concept that you're going to build this huge factory, assembly line style constructions, if I find that annoying, clearly it's not the game for me. Deadlock is seemingly just going to be in beta testing. It might be in beta testing and a loosely early access state for a very long time. People are still playing Baldur's Gate 3, so there is an argument that is still very relevant. Obviously, people are still playing Call of Duty. This Once Human seems like it has caught some people's attention. It's labeled as a survival game, and it does seem like it has some survival aspects, but it also seems like there's more of a game there than just chopping down trees and building things. Monster Hunter World, still very popular, but clearly its numbers have dwindled, and the scale of popularity is really different now, in that at its peak, Monster Hunter World, which is a really big game, only got up to 300,000 players. A big part of that, almost certainly, though, is also that Monster Hunter World is probably played by way more people on the PlayStation, way more Japanese and Asian people on the PlayStation. And Monster Hunter World, I believe, was not released at the same time on PC as it was on the PlayStation. If we see a new generation of Monster Hunter game that is released day and date on PC, it will be an interesting comparison if we see 2, maybe even 3 times as many players on PC for the next release. Elden Ring still being played by its fandom, which is true for lots of games on this list. Most of the games I'm ignoring are being are in that way. This Space War Telltale Games, don't know what it is really, but it seems like people are still playing it quite a bit. Overwatch 2, even though I would say is probably mostly irrelevant, manages to have enough players. And that does bring about the bot issue, in that if you made an argument that 30,000 of the 52,000 players on this game are just bots, I'd be open to believing that, certainly. And then its overall player base is not very high. Again, Overwatch 2 may be the numbers are way lower because of the Steam version being different than other versions. Then you have some staples that are just going to stay around forever, like Terraria, Binding of Isaac, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Some of the top all-time numbers here, in comparison, also speak to some weirdness in that I would argue something like God of War Ragnarok feels like it should be way more relevant, but it being released late on Steam, clearly it doesn't actually have that many people playing it, and never will, because people will get this game when it's on sale, or they'll just get it whenever they feel like it, and there won't be a massive surge on day one to play it. And so you have so many different possibilities muddling up the situation that the entire top 100 games becomes very difficult for me to find any of it relevant to me as a gamer in the way I play games. And I can't help but think that that's the truth for a lot of gamers. I still have not spent the extra time to fix this chart and balance this out a little bit, although I think for the most part it's still fairly accurate. At this point, Black Myth Wukong is in the 4th spot, and we shall see how this just keeps on going. But yeah, it is, I guess, very much the case that whether you're a PC gamer, whether you're a console gamer, let's check out Once Human, see if we can get some more information about that. You can very well just be in your own independent little world. The internet was thought that it would bring people together, but in recent decades it really has just allowed everybody to be in their own small, some people would call them echo chambers. Sometimes I think they are echo chambers, but their own little small group of people that self-enforce. I see that on things like Facebook or Reddit too, in that you'll look at one group's postings and that one group will be obsessed about that one thing, and then the Facebook algorithm will try and show you nothing but that, except for all the other times that it's just trying to show you bot posts that are being upvoted by other bots. The Facebook algorithm in particular is pretty awful, whereas Reddit's algorithm of the front page is very minimal, and that's somewhat helpful, but it also just leads to you going to the same major subreddits, and each subreddit is fairly tightly controlled as far as what kind of content is in it, and fairly tightly controlled as far as what the narrative it is. Reddit is effectively a bullying system with its upvotes, so that anybody with a even slightly disagreeable comment gets downvoted into oblivion, and on top of that, posts that people don't agree with get downvoted and not highlighted. So yeah, Reddit effectively introduces the idea of capitalism controlling speech. Instead of each person having their one voice and each voice is being equal, it allows people who can buy bots to downvote things more strength, mods who can delete things more strength, even though the mods are biased in their own opinions and in no way objective and fair, generally speaking. But but you can also buy like Reddit Gold and just spend actual money to make certain posts popular. It also has no accounting for joke posts and definitely no accounting for reposts. So you'll see the same things posted up over and over again. And so there's no encouragement of new thought. I'm not sure how you really fix it. If anything, I think it would probably be a case where there should be some kind of limiting factor on just how much you can post, so that you can't flood forums, and the upvote downvote element should go away. Of course, that's exactly the same thing YouTube said when getting rid of the dislike button, and I don't know if that really helped. First thing I think you'd probably address is just the stealing of other people's content to react to them on YouTube. Doing reposts on Twitter is kind of exactly, I mean on Reddit is kind of the exact same thing. If you could just say, hey, this doesn't look original, we're not going to let you post it as your own original content, maybe you can comment on it and repost it that way, then that might be one way to take the first step to fix some of those issues. Once there's severely less content that is able to post to a site like Reddit, because it has to be original, thoughtful, good content, then the moderation issue becomes much more attainable, and it isn't just a situation where people throw up their hands and say, well, this is impossible to moderate. Yeah, it would be fairly possible to moderate forums like Reddit if you could automatically prevent bots and repeats and stuff like that. Nothing really going on Steam at the moment. It's the issue. This casting of Frank Stone is still very mixed in its reviewed. This is the weird game that I think I was trying to find the ratings on this by the ESRB, but it's not even being listed here. Because I think this game said, no, it's just frequent violent and gore, general mature content. I thought the ESRB rated this as having nudity in it, and that just seemed like a weird game to have nudity in it, and I guess I was wrong. What's weird about all these pictures, though, as far as the casting of Frank Stone, is I don't see anything here that looks like somebody I would call Frank Stone. So, yeah. And this is not connected to the Alan Wake series. This is connected to the Dead by Daylight series spin-off game. Well, I guess at this point I can probably just put it off the follow list, because I'm probably never going to play it. So let's look at Once Human. Once Human is a multiplayer open world survivor game in a strange post-apocalyptic future. Interesting twist to it. By adding just the word strange, that opens you up to doing something different instead of just generic post-apocalypse. Unite with friends to fight monstrous enemies, uncover secret plots, complete compete for resources, build your own territory. Once you are merely human, now you have the power to remake the world. So, in a lot of ways, it feels like we're getting back to just a new generation of World of Warcraft, in that you're being encouraged to play as groups, you're having boss raids, dungeon raids. Yes, you're managing survival resources and gathering resources, but I think that too was a thing you could do in World of Warcraft to some level. Looking at the screenshots here, it does seem like there's a lot more running and gunning here. Which you're going to have an interesting contrast, certainly, in the fact that bullets might be very prevalent, while other resources like food and water may take more work. But yeah, on the face of it, this really does feel more like a game that just has a base building mechanic and is a run and gun shooter with survival elements. But it seems also like you get out of a fairly early stage of survival elements if you are just building entire buildings. Now, inherently, if this game is an MMO with in-app purchases, you would have to find some way to monetize here, or they're just never going to add new content, new bosses, new dungeons. Because it's an MMO, I'm going to take it off my wish list. I mean, my fall list, but that's the only reason. Anyways, I guess that's about as much warm-up as I'm going to get. So let's go through the Video Games Chronicle stories. I do think, of the parts I've done, my new macro is working fairly well. As best as I think I can expect it to work. I still want to add Gaming on Linux as a news source. I still need to get the fall list cleanup part to run well also, so that I'm looking at least 5 games from the fall list to consider whether or not to remove them from the fall list every time I stream, even if I'm actually doing all of that content off screen. But yeah, my fall list is difficult to manage otherwise, or impossible to manage. I did some more tinkering, I think, on the CSS of these pages, and I think I've probably got it as good as I can get it. We're not stretching these images to the maximum, but that's probably for the better, just in case some of these headlines roll down. There's always going to be room for more tinkering, and never enough time for tinkering. I still don't feel like my overall schedule, if I even have free time, which is a big if, is being implemented well, in the sense that playing Punch Club right now, I've hit a point where I probably should do a lot of the working out off screen just to rush towards an end. Otherwise I'm going to end up with 30 episodes with about 10 of them being nothing as far as interesting content goes. And the episodes already are getting longer and longer. But I also ideally would like to jump on to a different game and play 2 games in parallel. Maybe that's just an ADD twitch that I'm having, and it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. But yeah, that is my feeling. Although inherently, if I was going to do that, what I'm making up for is the fact that I'm not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And if I was going to do that, I should just play Yu-Gi-Oh! I have somewhat changed my schedule right now, so I'm not hitting points where I'm just sitting around waiting for something to happen. So there really isn't a point where I know for the next 2 hours I can't make recordings, but I know I could do something else that I could be interrupted with. If there was, I probably should be playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At that point, or playing something on my Nintendo Switch. But yeah. That it definitely does feel like I'd like to be doing something different. And a big part of that certainly is just that Punch Club is getting boring. Particularly trying to marathon it. It feels like a game that really should be a mobile game where you just would come in every day and the fights would go automatically as an idle game in the background, and every day you'd just be earning a lot more money. You don't earn a lot of money when you win a fight. That's part of the problem with the balance of the game too. But yeah, if you were to come in every day and set a schedule, like in the mornings you work out, in the afternoons you earn money for food, and then in the evenings you fight, and just kind of set a schedule like you would in some games like Princess Maker, that would make a lot more sense. Speaking of mobile games, I want to finish the main story of the Sakura game, but I haven't launched the Sakura game on my phone in a couple days already. Like, its main gameplay loops are bad. It is not a fun experience. And so, even as a nostalgic experience, it's overly demanding to go through even one chapter of the story, because it's just a lot of time. And I have already fast forwarded through several parts of the story. Yeah, it definitely is just not the way to ingest Cardcaptor Sakura, even from a nostalgic play. It is better just to watch it streaming, or watch it off of DVDs, Blu-rays, whatever. Anyways, we were going to go through video game news. It doesn't look like there was too much over the weekend as far as video game news, which isn't super surprising. Final Fantasy XIV's next big update will kick off a Final Fantasy XI crossover Alliance Raid series. Patch 7.1 Crossroads will arrive in November and will continue Dawn Trail's main scenario quest. Now, is Final Fantasy XIV the online game? Let's see. Final Fantasy XI was Square Enix's first MMORPG, but I think 14 might be the second MMORPG. Part of the problem Square Enix has here is that they've just put Final Fantasy on far too many titles, when in particular they had successes. They should have spun those off to be their own series. Then it could have been a Final Fantasy multiverse. If Final Fantasy 13, for instance, had been spun off, instead of just trying to have, I think they made a trilogy of those games, if they had just tried to set that world and those characters in their own world, then they probably would have been closer to 5 or 6 games by now. And then the vast majority of Final Fantasy games would just not get spun off because they weren't well received. Tony Hawk drops another video game tease. There will be a future, is the quote. This kid had previously claimed he was talking to Activision again. Now the margin here seems a little off on this picture. I wonder what specifically is the deal with this one that it's so far to the left. And reloading the page will almost certainly do nothing. So yeah, that probably is a case where they manually moved this one picture in Video Games Chronicle did to the left a little bit more. Either that, or I have used some fixed spacing when I should have used a percentage spacing. Always use percentages in your CSS, whether you're using the viewpoint measurements of VH or VW is fine. Those are still percentages of what the viewport is, where a regular percentage is going to be the percentage of the original size of an image, or the percentage of the overall canvas of the web page. Viewport measurements are the best way to go, but take more tinkering to figure out. Clearly, I'm not interested too much in Tony Hawk. In particular, I'm just not interested in Tony Hawk. I think at this point, there's a real argument that he is using his name in a poor way instead of bringing up the newer skaters who could be celebrities. And it's really a case where he's pulling up the ladder behind him and that they're not making room for a new generation of skaters. I can't even name any other skateboard skater. Tony Hawk is really old to do that, and we don't even have like a Tony Hawk Jr. kid that he's trying to promote. But yeah, almost certainly some new generation of skaters do exist, and there should be some promotion of that. And if that's not the case, then skating games should just have fake characters anyways, instead of paying for a license of Tony Hawk. Same situation with like the Madden games. It's kind of ridiculous to call football games Madden games while ignoring so many other football players that could have been in prominence in the football games. Anyways, moving on. Todd Howard says Bethesda games are irresponsibly large. Explains why we cut very little from our games, Starfield's game director says. So is this a different director than Todd Howard? It's a bold move, Cotton, to quote a movie. I think that's, what is that? Basketballs or something? But yeah, effectively what this sounds like is Todd Howard has finally had to admit that their games, as far as square footage, are too big. Also, the amount of content in their games have always been too big for their Gamebryo modification that they call the creation engine, their game engine. It's always been too big. It's always been buggy and crashy. It's always taken way too long to develop games, and a lot of focus is on small minutia that just doesn't really matter. And over the years, a lot of the small minutia that would have been potentially highlighted or introduced in something like Skyrim has become fairly commonplace in more standard engines like Unreal and Unity. Just the ability to pick up a 3D model and have it have physics on it and gravity affect it. What once was a selling point that you could pick up a cup in Skyrim and drag it around is now just a basic thing that you can do in minigames. And in both cases, it always was kind of a pointless thing to do. They've never made it a great gameplay mechanic at all. So what Bethesda games have once seen as a selling point, they are now finally being forced, probably because they're now owned by Microsoft years later, but with the new Microsoft leadership, they're finally being forced to really admit, yeah, our games are too big. But yeah, it is, in my opinion, way more about focus than size. Like Starfield could be as big as it is if it just had a little more focus on things existing, story existing, and just bespoke creative content existing in it, instead of trying to be this open world sandbox playfield. I don't think I heard anybody complain about Fallout 4 or Fallout 76 being too large in square footage, but also I don't think enough people sung the praises of Fallout 4 as far as its base building mechanics. And they definitely were not happy that a lot of the open world gameplay style content of base building effectively replaced the bespoke creative content. So this may be a hint that they are, I think, begrudgingly being forced to make creative content from actual writers, actual creators, and less just we'll make a system that people can make mods on that we can sell mods for, which is what their focus has really been. So let's see if we can maybe get into the deeper, because this really has caught my attention. Howard, who serves as executive producer and director of Bethesda Game Studios, was most recently the game director on Starfield. So it's the same person. So that's a weird headline to say game director says when Todd Howard says is right there. Yeah. It's like somebody wrote this sentence and then the editor-in-chief rewrote the sentence without actually reading it to see if it still made sense. The reason Bethesda games are so big is because the studio really rarely cuts content. My job on games is often to be a director, a little bit like a movie director. So he's saying it's so big because they never cut anything else, and he thinks that this is an attractive thing to say to either game developers he might be looking to hire or game players, where inherently you probably could make a cut content mod for Starfield to make it closer to a 10-hour experience that is really tight and interesting, and just get rid of the random landing on planets and gathering resources elements. And I do think a lot of games would benefit from mods like that, where you're just getting the Cliff Notes version of a game. You get from the beginning to the credits as far as the story, but you cut out all the Final Fantasy turn-based grinding, fighting enemies to level up enemies. Which I'm still surprised that we aren't seeing remasters, as we're hitting a point where games are getting remastered on top of remastered. It would make some sense to just have speedier quality of life improvements. But yeah, I totally disagree with the idea that them not cutting content is the problem. Them being given the green light to create content in the first place is the problem. Being given the green light to create certain content while not creating others. It is clearly a shifting of allocating of resources, is what I'm trying to say there. In that, if you have a big old pile of money, right now Bethesda games are putting a majority of chunk of that money towards 3D modeling and physics and object manipulation and game engine stuff, and they're putting a very small pile of money to writing characters as far as dialogue writing storyline plots, writing different scenarios, voice acting people, having any kind of personality and story at all. And as forms of entertainment, what is in this small pile, which is getting underfunded, is mostly what people need. And it's not just video games where those kinds of creative inputs are getting underfunded. Look at how bad movies are these days. Look how bad I think books, in a lot of ways, have been pretty awful always, and perhaps that is because books are an individual effort when making a collaborative effort. Series might make some more sense. That there is a transition from like George R.R. Martin's single stories being fairly good, but then it being elevated somewhat more by the first seasons of Game of Thrones. Of course, as soon as Game of Thrones didn't have George R.R. Martin's underlying story plots for the final seasons, it got pretty bad. But generally speaking, I do think books written, single person efforts, books written by one person, are at best going to be a good starting point, and then the collaborative effort elements make it better. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd highly encourage authors to have their books ghostwritten by other people too, in collaborative efforts more often than not. But yeah, I do think it's kind of crazy that books are as bad as they are. You know, one thing I did think of is there is no recognizable book or story that I know of called "Danger is my maiden name," where that seems like that would be a really good title for some kind of story. Something where somebody should have written something that was good. And I'll just throw out a pitch immediately here, since I'm never going to do it, that if you're going to have a title like that, that it immediately evokes to me a story of a female assassin who decides to retire and get married and just become a housewife and live a quiet, peaceful life, and then she inevitably would get pulled back into it, and so then it would be this whole reverse gender flipped True Lies type story, where the wife is revealing to the probably nerdy average Joe husband that she used to be a spy. And yeah, that's just off the top of my head, really, as far as a thought from just the title. So there's your writing prompt, I suppose, if you wanted to do any creative writing. But yeah, I googled it, and the only thing I could find is that there is a Tumblr account as like the second, like no, I think it was an Etsy account by that phrase. Yeah. The sad truth is I don't believe people are as creative as they think they are. I don't know why that is the case, but also it may be a case that creative people are not being highlighted. That's one argument for like AI creation, is that really creative people in one way might be able to find prompts. For instance, it may just become the case that a nobody like me could say, tell AI to write a story with that title, "Danger's my maiden name," and AI might be able to churn out something that at least is a good foundation. Although clearly I wouldn't have any real creative input there other than the title, nor would I probably have enough passion in whatever AI churned out. Might be a good framework to say, hey, I don't like this part, let's add this other section. It might be a great starting point for people who have trouble looking at a blank piece of paper writing. But yeah, that is also still going to be built on the backs of AI that has just stolen everybody else's writing, although writers probably should be stealing. Anyways, we're supposed to be talking about video games, and I'm rambling here. So Kojima details Death Stranding 2 photo shoot event and in-game dance number. Photo shoot event will have some influence on the main story. And so it seems like they've got several people all wearing these jackets. I don't know if these are friends of Kojima or these are just models. They all seem to be in these yellow jackets. Which, yeah. Reddit was weirdly talking about how someone found out Kojima had a wife and thinking he was gay because of just the naked Raiden scene and the way men are depicted in the Metal Gear Solid series. But yeah, I would imagine being Japanese, he just has an eye for both body forms. This is weird, to say the least, because it's just not giving me enough to actually care. And it really just feels like a gimmick. And there was a lot of gimmicks. So it features characters Tamara, Rainy, and Fragile. My concern certainly is that this is probably evidence that Kojima is just falling deeper and deeper into gimmicks. And the first Death Stranding itself was very much built around some pretty dumb gimmicks in the gameplay mechanic and the package delivering and package shipping mechanic. There's definitely an argument that if I could get my hands on Death Stranding, I would strip out most of the package delivering gameplay mechanic, the online server living world gimmick, and try to just have a traditional story game with some stealth elements and some shooting, which I know it wouldn't really work with the way they had set up the story, but yeah, the whole package delivering, the whole side quests, which seemed like they were overwhelming, the whole product placement, the whole insanity to a point where it doesn't come off as a coherent story. Like, I dare anyone to try and explain the entire story of Death Stranding 1 and sound like a sane person while describing it. I also wonder, here, on this photo shoot, why is there so much just redness here? That's probably a lens flash, yeah. This is blown out. They used a flash here and that made their skin feel too red. But they did something different here with the lighting, so it didn't have a flash. Yeah, this picture, and this picture seemed like they were done with a flash. Probably quick, early. And then they said that's not working with a flash, and they probably set up actual lighting for the rest of these pictures. But yeah, just a weird gimmick. Kojima also says Death Stranding 2's release date is decided, but he can't reveal it. The release date wasn't announced during the presentation due to unforeseen circumstances. I wonder if that means this is some way of them hiding a delay, or if this is a thing where this was going to be a State of Play PlayStation announcement, but PlayStation didn't care to actually make the announcement at that time and wants to wait later. Of course, it also could be announced at the Game Awards. That makes a lot of sense too. This image also not really catching my attention as far as Death Stranding. It'd be really hard to get me interested in Death Stranding 2 when I never am going to play Death Stranding 1. I think that's highly likely what's going to happen, is that the numbers are just going to drop off to extremely small amounts as far as people willing to go back and play Death Stranding 2. It probably would be a game that would work better if it was day and date released or almost free to play. Ken Kutaragi claims everyone at Sony thought the PlayStation would fail. Kutaragi left Sony in 2007, so you're talking many, many years ago, following the difficult launch of the PlayStation 3, which I understand what he's probably implying is that people thought the first PlayStation 1 would fail, because remember, the PlayStation 1 was really being made out of spite against Nintendo after Nintendo screwed them, because Nintendo was going to work with Sony and have a disc-based console, and the negotiations fell through, probably because Nintendo screwed them, and then they kind of rushed to make the PlayStation 1, but the power of the CD at ROMs and just audio CDs and DVD playback of the PlayStation 2 managed massive success in Japan. And then once they got successful, they immediately entered into that cycle of a couple of successful consoles, then some failure consoles. I'd say PlayStation 3 was a powerhouse hardware-wise, but a failure as far as adoption-wise, which they were making a very tough pitch for games to be developed for the PlayStation 3. I'd say the PlayStation 4 didn't have enough software, and even now the PlayStation 5 doesn't have enough software. I think we are closer now than we have been in a very long time as far as PlayStation's being deemed a failure. Of course, they're going to just be deemed a failure by whoever's in charge and really nobody else, and then they will give up on that. Inherently, if the parent company of Sony stops making Blu-ray discs, if there are only one factory in the world that makes Blu-ray discs or any kind of spinning disc medium, then you're going to have an all digital future. If all digital futures then aren't profitable enough, you'll just see them give up on the PlayStation. I think Sony, at some level in their accounting, probably does not like a potential future where Sony Blu-ray video discs are not being made and they're not making a profit on that, and then there's a trickle-down effect of Sony PlayStations not being bought to play Blu-ray discs, which there's still a decent chance that, particularly in Japan, that's the case. It would be kind of crazy in a small Japanese apartment to have a PlayStation 4 or 5 and have a separate Blu-ray 4K UHD player. Some people, audiophiles, videophiles, would have that, yes, but your average person, no. So, yeah, it very much feels like the parent companies of Sony may eventually just give up on PlayStation. And in some way, they kind of had. They'd certainly given up control of Sony Interactive Entertainment to California under the previous leadership. Now they're taking it back. They might very well give up control again to foreigners, but then I also think they may just give up completely. Of course, right now there's a lot of work Sony has to do as far as just pleasing the PC fans if they were going to get rid of hardware. If Sony did work through all those problems and figured out a way to launch games on the Steam without having requirements for Sony PlayStation Online and not having any real bugginess, then they would just become a regular game publisher. They wouldn't have to spend money and lose money making hardware. But in their mind, they are still very much competing against Nintendo. and I'm not sure that there's enough that Nintendo ever would do to convince Sony to give up in their fight in competition against Nintendo. The weirdest thing I suppose they could do, and it's probably never happened, is if Microsoft said, let's team up with Sony to make one console, and we'll have like all sales in Asian countries, all the profits go to you. If this new PlayStation Xbox combo is sold in Japan, all the profits go to Sony, but if it's sold in the West, all the profits go to Microsoft. That kind of deal wouldn't probably ever be reached and agreed upon, but if there was something like that and then there was just one console fighting against Nintendo's console, then something like that could happen, and then PlayStation could have Xbox handle all the hardware development. And yeah, if I was Microsoft, I probably would want to take that deal, just give up on trying to sell Xboxes in Japan and instead get more money for just designing the hardware of what the PlayStation console was. I really am just rambling today. I think we talked about this before, but the modder that put in a PlayStation remover has removed that mod that removed the PlayStation Network remove to avoid potential legal actions. It was put on Nexus Mods, and I think Nexus Mods themselves contacted the modder. Yeah, it says, we've had a chat with the mod author about this and can confirm the mod was removed due to personal decision after it received significant traction, including coverage from prominent news outlets, to avoid any future action by Sony. Speaking of legal actions, I've noticed Adafruit, as Halloween is about to happen, has been putting out YouTube shorts on how to 3D print and make props for making Bowsette's crown or Cappy from Mario Odyssey. So there's been 2 Nintendo character costume mods that they've highlighted. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo sends them a cease and desist on that, even though this would just be fans 3D printing costumes for Halloween. I bet Nintendo actually makes a decent amount of money licensing for official costumes. On the other hand, there probably also are plenty of unofficial Nintendo-based character costumes at every Spirit Halloween, but also each of those Spirit Halloweens disappear for 10 months out of the year, so suing them would be fairly difficult. I did hear God of War Ragnarok seems to play pretty well on Steam, and that it has a shader compilation system where when you first launch the game, it's just pre-compiling all the shaders as they go. And apparently there was another system that some games used where they would use shaders that had been compiled during beta testing, and that wasn't as efficient as far as quality goes. Vampire Survivors developer Ponicle opens up a publishing arm. Yep, this is something I think we all sort of talked about. So it seems like we got a couple of extra stories, but not that many. And now we are at the Gamatsu articles, and now we're into the stream. I'm not staying on track very well. So Vampire Hunters is here. I'm not sure why. This came out July 28, 2023 and is still in early access. Seemingly no story connected to that, or maybe I accidentally closed it, or maybe my macro actually accidentally closed it. Weird. So Asato course, Evo for PC launches in early access on January 16th. This, I assume, is a racing car game. And like all modern car games, they tend to look very pretty in their screenshots. And that seems to be about all they can sell themselves on these days. Neon Blood launches November 26th. See it on Steam. I'm at 950 subscribers right now on YouTube. That there is potentially an argument to try to guesstimate when I'd hit 1,000 and have some content scheduled to actually air during that time. I'm not really seeing myself grow while no content is airing, though. And unless there is something about the algorithm where as soon as you're exactly over 1,000 subscribers, you start getting promoted more, which very possibly that is the case, there's not really a reason to try and time out things. I should just schedule things for probably starting January 1st. Anyways, the Smurfs Dreams demo is now available. It's a 3D platformer. The Smurfs as characters are not characters I particularly care about. There's quite a few cartoons that maybe you remember, or if you're old enough, but they aren't actually that good. For me, I imagine the oldest cartoon like that I remember actually airing would be Captain N. And yeah, there's no relevancy to Captain N that you'd ever see him show back up. They probably work as well as like Trolls movies. Like the Trolls movies made a lot of sense because they just put a bunch of music in them. So if the license for the Smurfs is cheap enough and you can make a generic 3D platformer and get a few more eyes on it, that starts to make some sense. Although inherently it feels like more often than not, even if you do have a licensed somewhat noticeable name, games without a lot of publishing and advertisement just don't sell and just don't get enough coverage by news people. That has been consistently the problem with a lot of anime-based things. This Hunter x Hunter Nin Impact has been delayed to 2025, and I question whether Hunter x Hunter will even be that relevant by the time the game comes out. You also have that real problem of, by the time an anime is out these days, it's usually they're released almost simulcasted as they're coming out in Japan. So unless you have a super long running series, by the time 4 years has gone by to develop a game based on an anime, that anime series is probably not on the air anymore and is wrapped up. And so then this story has to be very interesting that people just have nostalgia for something that's only 4 years old. And even that, in the case of that has only really worked fairly well for Dragon Ball. Most Sword Art Online games are not interesting, and most One Piece games are not interesting. This week's Japanese game releases are Until Dawn and Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream, and more. So, mentioning a Sword Art Online game. I'd assume this is the Until Dawn remake, and not just a PS5 version of Until Dawn. Although it might just be the Japanese release of Until Dawn really late. It's rated 0Z, which is the adults only content, probably for gore, if I was to guess. Notice how Gamatsu doesn't get into the weeds as far as ratings. So, yeah. And, yeah, if I was to click here, let's see what that even takes me. If I click North American version, it's going to take me to a PlayAsia affiliate link. Let's see. Rated M for mature. Does PlayAsia show ratings? Let's see. Blood, gore, sexual content, and or strong language. But inherently, this description may be used for anything rated M for mature. I bet if I said, show me the Japanese version of this, I half expected all the text on the screen to switch to Japanese. I'm having that whole thing where I'm scrolling up and the image is still resetting. I think this is a Firefox thing, though. But yeah. There's some weirdness where everything just kind of blinks. Sometimes the monitor will fully go black screen for a second. I don't know if my graphics card is maybe having some trouble when it runs out of RAM. Yeah, it just says 0Z 18 plus. Doesn't say anything more descriptive than that. Then we have Kill Night here from October 2nd. Don't know why. Probably because that was the first link that had Steam on it. Then we already talked about this photo shoot. A lot of these really do just look like they are casting headshots. Matsu doing a much better job as far as actually showing the pictures, whereas Video Games Chronicles did a very poor job of linking things. It does give me the feeling that this guy here, which wasn't even one of the pictures we'd seen before, the main character of the first game, I question if he is going to play very little of a role, and that the move here is going to be to focus on some of these new characters. Also, you have a weird puppet character here. It may be that this guy is just going to be the boss of what this whole thing looks like. It's a shipping container, and the name of the subtitle of the game is On the Beach. So the entire gimmick of the game, I don't know what this is here on his thumb, but the whole gimmick of the game may be the case that you are going to have this floating base on a beach and on the ocean, and you're going to send out these characters to do things, probably deliver goods. If that guess is anywhere close to being right, you run into a major danger in that the game may be mostly ocean based, water level based, effectively. It also seems like he just has a real desire here to throw in a whole bunch of new characters, more celebrities he can rub elbows with. That's really his only concern. The El Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron HD remaster is coming to the PS5. So what had been announced for before, it's currently already available for Switch and PC. and the original game is available for the PS3 and Xbox 360. My hope here would be that you would get a continuation of the El Shaddai series, but I don't think there's a lot of chance of that happening. This game was very experimental, had entire missions and levels that just were very different from other levels. But yeah. Its relevancy comes in the fact that it's just something I have nostalgic for, and enough people have nostalgia for. It really does get very close to some of the games on Steam though, where it would have less than 30 user reviews if it had just been originally released on Steam instead of being released on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 back in the day. And some people might have liked it and reviewed it very positively, but the vast majority of people would have just never seen it. And even in the case of it being released on the 360, still I think the vast majority of people have never seen this game. And because it's so experimental and there's just entire levels that play differently than other levels, it makes it not a particularly strong game to recommend or highlight either, because of its weirdness. It really is one of those games that something like Giant Bomb back in the day would have needed to do a full long play on and highlighted and used their audience at the time to get more people to watch it and play it. What is the DLC here? A soundtrack and an art book. Yeah, I don't think there was ever any game DLC. Let's see. Moving on, Nine Souls is coming to the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One and Series and Switch on November 26th. It's currently already available for PC, so it's coming over to consoles. You can see it's overwhelmingly positive overall. Metroidvania game, so I can go ahead and put that on the wish list. Stellar Blade updated to version 0.1.007.00. It adds quality of life features and visual improvements. The visual improvements in part is that the physics now affect the skirts of Eve and other characters, particularly for the photo mode that's been introduced. So before it was a case that skirts would just lie flat, covering the butt if there was a wind. Now skirts have physics on it, so if there's winds, these skirts or flaps will flap up. Inherently, I think this improvement in physics has also just improved all physics, but it's always very noticeable when it improves skirts. It also improved boob jiggle physics in Stellar Blade. It might very well also be the case that these were the physics that were originally intended to be in the game by at least some of the creators, and Sony put censorship in the game while not admitting that they were censoring it, and made Stellar Blade and Shift Up claim that this was the intended thing, because there was a whole controversy about that where pre-patch, pre-launch, the boob physics were more bouncier and they became less bouncier after the patch, and maybe now they are just undoing the patch. Shift Up still feels like they are in the mindset and the desire to have their characters as attractive as possible and have the physics in this case look as attractive as possible. It's very possibly a little too late to be making any changes, though, as far as as far as this game has just been out for too long now. So yeah, just in case you don't believe me, here it says, skirt physics, strong winds can blow up skirts. Prior to this, only mountain peony was effective. Mutan peony, I don't know what that was. There is perhaps a danger that Shift Up is being too much in their mindset as far as maintaining a game like Stellar Blade and updating a game like Stellar Blade instead of potentially working on their next game. But this may also be a case where they're just doing work that they're being paid to do by Sony, since Sony is the publisher. But yeah, the fact that Shift Up previously had only made 2 free to start mobile games that were just constantly getting updates every month may speak to a style of game development that Shift Up is used to doing that does not really make sense for console disc-based games. Yeah, here you can see before the patch the boobs were kind of lifted and separated while she was bent over. Here the patch, they have more physics to them and act more natural in that if you lean over, boobs tend to be, if they're real boobs and not implants, they tend to squish together and sag and just bounce in general more. Of course, you'd be forgiven if you're not looking at the chest of a character to think that the before and after here is supposed to be something about the hair or the arm or even the background. But as far as I can tell, none of that is different. And I would assume this is a cutscene. Moving on. AI Limit has a limited time demo launching October 14th. We'll leave it at that. I kind of get the feeling that I was at one point a little interested, a little bit hyped on AI Limit, but I don't remember if that's the game I'm thinking of or not. It's kind of it's too early until the game is actually out to get hyped about anything. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 DLC character Future Saga Chapter 2 has a teaser trailer. I have no idea who this clown is. Can you make custom characters in Xenoverse, or was there just a point in Dragon Ball where they were getting just really ridiculous with the character creators? Now this guy over here looks like one of the later introduced characters in Dragon Ball, but then this fatter version of him, I don't recognize him. This guy I definitely don't recognize. And certainly that probably highlights an issue too, as far as the whole Dragon Ball series, is that if you're a fan of Dragon Ball Z when it first was airing, you're not going to have seen the movies, you're not going to know who Broly is, and you're not really going to know any character after, like, Mojang Buu, I can't even pronounce it, Majin Buu, yeah, I think is his name. Whereas GT and later Dragon Ball series are introducing new characters and moving the story forward. And then the whole blue hair Goku is a whole new thing also. I have no idea who any of these characters are. I don't know how you really introduce these characters either. Like, I don't know how you get somebody like me who watched Dragon Ball a little bit, Dragon Ball Z a little bit, when they were younger. I don't know how you get them back on track. There was at one time I was thinking of watching some of the newer Dragon Ball, but I don't even think it's like on a streaming service to make it easy. And even if it was on a streaming service, it still wouldn't be super easy. For all I know, the whole Xenoverse here is alternate universes, and a lot of these characters don't show up in any of the animes. This is one of those cases where I guess if you got really lucky and timed it out and had kids fairly early, you might have been able to have an appropriately aged child who was into Dragon Ball bring you back into watching Dragon Ball yourself. But that almost never works out. Whatever you as a parent are kind of interested in is not the thing your kids are likely going to be interested in, and that's probably for the better. But yeah. I do envy the anime fans that just manage to be anime fans from their edgelord teenage years all the way into 30s, 40s, 50s, just all the way through their lives without having some period in which they stopped watching as much as they did. The One Piece fans might be a great example of that. People who have been watching One Piece from the beginning or reading the manga from the beginning. It's probably easier to read the manga of like One Piece in Japan though, if you are just commuting every day and just have that extra free time. Moving on, Genshin Impact version 5.1 update, The Rainbow Destined to Burn, launches October 9th. That brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Actually, as far as the Gaming on Linux articles, I guess I can just recite it from the top of my head today anyways, because it doesn't look like there was more than 3 stories and 2 of them were just talking about games. There's going to be some weirdness around that in that Gaming on Linux will just talk about games that maybe really are not new games with new announcements coming out around them. They may just be games that the one editor-in-chief of Gaming on Linux is interested in talking about, or games that maybe have just been tested to play on the Steam Deck or on Linux in general. But the big thing as far as news and Gaming on Linux is that Valve has committed to fund 2 aspects of the Arch Linux project. At a certain point, this could be considered good sponsorship, but if you are more conspiracy minded and want to put on the tinfoil hat, you certainly could also describe it as a case that Valve is putting its money where its mouth is and trying to exert more influence and control over the Arch Linux project to make sure it goes faster down the path of developing and improving in general, perhaps more specifically down paths that would make it better and more amenable to SteamOS, since SteamOS is based on Arch Linux. What they are specifically funding, though, is they have funded and set them up with an automated build process system. So that means when something is updated in the core elements of Arch Linux, the master branch on like GitHub, when something is changed there, it's going to pull resources from other parts of Linux that it was dependent on. I suppose the easiest example here is that if the master branch of Arch Linux is updated, an automated build process is going to pull the Linux kernel from Linus Torvalds' GitHub page, I imagine, and then build it into an executable. And by automating that process and seeing if that works and running some tests on it to make sure it works correctly, you're saving yourself a lot of time. It's not just going to pull the kernel, though. Arch Linux is being a fork of just generic Linux, or being a branch of Linux. It's probably also going to pull things like the Cups printer service, which there was a vulnerability just found about that. So everybody should update their operating systems if they offer an update. It's going to pull the KDE desktop if you're doing that. Although I guess Arch Linux probably wouldn't do that. The basic part of Arch Linux probably is not going to have any desktop environment and is just going to boot to a text console screen. But yeah, it'll pull a whole bunch of things, thousands of things potentially, and so the whole automated process on that. The other thing that Valve is funding is just a software signing setup. The general idea there is that you make sure when you pull the kernel from Linux, you're actually getting the kernel for Linux and making sure everybody knows you're just getting the kernel from Linux and not some kind of modified backdoored version of the kernel for Linux, by just signing and checking signatures, encryptions on the software. And that could be actually fairly simple too, in that it might just be MD5 hashes of what the software should look like being compared to what the software is, or it could be full-on encryption. But yeah, the focus there with the software signing does say that SteamOS is probably looking closer and closer towards having a very tight set of controls on their operating system, and they're going to do their very best to prevent people from buying Steam Decks or installing SteamOS to create bots or modify software and cheat, or modify software to play cracked versions of games. But I don't think we're close enough towards anything happening at this point to get concerned that SteamOS at some point is going to become this lockdown operating system like iOS and the iPhones are, and that you just at some point aren't going to have an ability to install other software. But most of this is really just going to come down to trying to find a way to convince most game developers to not try and add their own anti-cheat to games that breaks their compatibility with the Steam Deck, which is, I would imagine, one of the top 3 concerns right now with the Steam Deck is just game compatibility breaking because of anti-cheat actions by the game developers and publishers. Anyways, moving on to our GameDeveloper.com news. I don't think I worked on this either, so we probably are going to hit a point here where we hit redundant news stories we've already talked about. So it's a Patch Notes number 4. Patch Notes, I think, is a podcast, or that they are also writing as articles. They say here that Strange Scaffold rejected a culture of hope to resurrect I Am Your Beast. He explains how the famously efficient studio honed the process to build a goated shooter in 9 months. So I'm not fully following this, but from what I'm getting is that a lot of people inside of Strange Scaffold wanted and hoped that to resurrect I Am Your Beast, and instead they went in a different direction and made something else. I don't know if that was Click Holding or Life Eater or El Paso elsewhere that they made next. Let's see. Sony increased the Horizon Zero Dawn PS4 price ahead of the PS5 remaster. This is an odd screenshot because it looks like it's in a completely different color palette from what the game actually looks like. It's not a bad color palette. It'd be kind of tough in motion to have this color palette. I've never seen a game that had super like light cloudy pastel shading to it. It'd be interesting to see somebody try, but they'd probably fail. Let's see. There's a report here that an analyst says, so a report of an analyst reporting that Nintendo Palworld's lawsuit is based on technical peculiarities. The legal odds may be enough in Nintendo's favor to harm Parker Pear for while it works to build the future of Palworld. Inherently, they brought this lawsuit right as Palworld was about to be released in a new fashion on in Japan, so they're already doing damage. What are the technical peculiarities? Though I bet this analyst knows nothing, because I bet he hasn't even seen. Toto believes Nintendo will get the studio on highly technical things, is the quote here, as it previously did in 2021 with mobile developer Coalpot. Yeah, he hasn't seen the patent lawsuit at all. He's just speculating. And you could say highly technical things to shoo away any questions in any situation. Now, I am noticing some tinkering here that needs to change. So I'll work. Excuse me. I'll work on that later. The indie publisher Merge Games is shutting down. The update now says Merge has said it's integrated into its parent company, Maximum Entertainment, but a former employee claims all but 2 of the team were laid off. Alright, well, with that, I think I'm going to take a little, just quick bathroom break. So I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. The dual lives I show when I pause are really still just highlighting how ridiculous the Yu-Gi-Oh game has just become. You see them in this last video summon. At least I saw 7 really powerful characters being summoned. Entire turns seemingly being skipped because they saw traps coming from the other player who had nothing on the field, and still this person taking a really long time to summon 8 characters or so on the field, losing because of tricks and traps. The strategies have just gotten incredibly crazy, and just the general gameplay takes way too long. Although in comparison, I did just see on Twitter an update for Marvel Snap, and there you have the exact opposite problem, in that the game is way too simple and has pretty much lost all of my interest, and I think most people's interest. And honestly, if Ben Brode Second Dinner announced a new game, I barely would have any interest. It is an interest, I guess, a intriguing study on how to lose an audience and how to lose a fandom through just sheer mediocrity and apathy. Uh, one would have assumed that a Marvel licensed game, would have caught people's attention, although in fairness, most licensed games that are mobile first or cell phone first are not particularly good, and Marvel Snap falls directly under that whole category. It's just not a particularly interesting thing. If only we could find some happy middle ground where Marvel Snap was just more of a traditional collectible card game, something closer to like Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel was way simpler. But I don't know how you really fix that either. I kind of like the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has more synergies than something like Magic the Gathering. It's just the synergies have gotten out of control. If there was perhaps a limit on the number of reactions and links, that might change things quite a bit. If you could only counter once and you couldn't chain actions at all in Yu-Gi-Oh! That might solve a lot. If you could only summon one thing per turn, that might solve a lot too. Moving on with the GameDeveloper.com headlines, I'm not sure if any of these stories are new, but the indie publisher Merge Games was shut down allegedly. Ubisoft employees in France called a strike over the return to office mandate. Spectre Divide Studio Mountaintop laid off 13 employees. Yeah, these are all older stories we've already talked about. And I will say it feels like the conversation as far as Ghost of Yotai has mostly died down, which it kind of had to, since it was just announced and we really don't have any details about it at all. Like, the only thing you could continuously argue about would just be boring, stupid assumption-based arguments. Yeah. So, if anything, I guess that does highlight where announcing something these days is not really the best way to publish a game. You need to announce something and then very quickly either have a demo out or announce something and then basically by the next week have more details coming out on a near weekly basis. Of course, don't do a Concord and announce a game and then push it out with no advertisement whatsoever. I guess really the path is you announce a game with a teaser trailer, then the next week you put out more details in a paper press release, next week you do some more, and you just try to slowly grow enthusiasm as much as you can based on what you can actually announce. But yeah, it certainly isn't working these days to put out a trailer and then 2 or 3 years later release a game. The style of Beyond Good and Evil 2 is kind of an exact example of what you can't do. Yeah, there's just no point in talking about any of these old stories. That being said, I should remind myself to work on that part too, because that's still not working. I'm not 100% sure why it wasn't working. Part of the problem, because of the bad programming interface that you have to use for UI Vision to make my macros, and because I made it more complicated by parallelizing all the macros when it's not really designed for that kind of... You can do it, but it's not really designed to efficiently do that. When I do work on the macros, my brain has to be in the right wide awake and thinking about it in a very good way state for me to wrap my head around it and make sure I know what I'm actually doing. And getting into that highly alert, woken up state mentally is getting more and more difficult, I think, as I get older and older. Like getting into that coding flow, almost fugue state was something I could do a lot better when I was younger, in particular also when I was in school and thinking about it more. Yep. It kind of sucks when I think about it, how when I was in school, in a high school, college age, that probably was the best mental state I was going to be as far as programming, and that's nowhere as good as I would have wanted to be. There was a ton of stuff I didn't know, a ton of stuff I hadn't learned yet, and a ton of stuff I didn't have time to work on or hadn't thought of. Plus, yeah, technology is just way better now. I had hoped, I would have thought that I would have just gotten better and better at programming consistently. Wasn't accounting for just being mentally exhausted, which, yeah, I guess a lot of kids in school aren't accounting for being mentally exhausted, and that's probably the best advice you could give to kids. It's like, prepare to be tired, prepare to be exhausted, prepare to be exploited, because all those things are going to happen. A lot of people make the speech, these are the best days of your life. That's a terrible thing to say to kids. But yeah, prepare to likely have romantic interests or children or family commitments or work commitments, almost certainly. Prepare for all of those things to take up some of your mental energy, a lot of your mental energy, most of your mental energy, and most of your time. And anything you personally want to accomplish is going to be moved down the priority ladder very quickly. Unfortunately, unless you're independently wealthy and just extremely lucky, then at that point you probably can do whatever you want. Anyways, I'm rambling here. Let's look at all the new games that came out on Steam. Interesting. That might be an interesting horror game. I'm still leaning towards saying no to any of these tycoon games because they don't seem interesting enough. I don't know how you would make a game builder tycoon type game interesting in the first place. Yeah. The actual job of it is boring, sitting in front of a computer. And now, if you were to put all the low-level programming thoughts of game development into a video game, you might as well just be actually programming a video game at that point, instead of playing a game about and programming it. And that's kind of true for a lot of the management simulator games, that you are just emulating. Interesting. This might be something. Yeah, you're just emulating actual jobs you could actually be doing. Although, where you get away from that is something like the grocery simulator game, where actually being the manager of a grocery store is not something a lot of people would want to commit to, nor is it something that you can just easily achieve, because getting the loans and investing and getting the land and getting construction done. Yeah. Same is kind of true with house flipping, is that it's so much easier to click a button to remodel a house with the house flipping simulator than it is to actually order the components and do it physically. Though that is something people can do if they're good at it. Speaking of house remodeling, since I have bought the Robo Vacuum now and I've been living with it for several weeks, I am noticing, and this might be a little gross, that pretty much with all new construction, you should install a wall-mounted toilet that is fairly high off the ground, that you have a good 10 inches at minimum off the ground from a wall-mounted toilet. Because with any new house, if it's going to last the next 100 years or so, I think we will see robo vacuums in general just become more and more popular. And one is, robo mopping vacuums, both of them. And in general, what's the number one place you want mopped? It would be in the bathroom, around the toilet in particular. Men tend to get sloppy, and we can just leave it at that. And frankly, even women tend to get sloppy too. So a traditional toilet, most of the robo mops right now aren't going to get as far to the edges. And to get away from bathrooms, I'm noticing that where it mops around the corners of walls in general is that there are clearly just these dark spots that the SwitchBot S10 is not hitting when it's mopping because of its mopping technology. If I had a mopper that had mopping pads, it probably would get into the corners, but if I did that, then I'd be losing all the advantage of the S10 in that it is constantly cleaning the rolling mop, and it is capable of actually pre-wetting the mop and managing the amount of supposedly clean water that it's putting on the mop. But yeah, I have programmed my SwitchBot S10 Robo Mop, and I guess this is a bit of a sales pitch because the Prime Big Day is happening October 8th, so that it might be on sale again for a more reasonable price. I got it at like $660, where which is still very expensive, certainly, but not anywhere as close as to some of the marked up prices it's claimed, like $1,100. But yeah, I have programmed it at this point where it does a light mopping of my bathrooms every single day in the morning, which is still way less than what you would do in like a busy office 3, 4, 5 times a day, certainly. But also in places that get cleaned that much, they tend not to have like home construction materials on the floor. Tile and grout, for instance, really is only supposed to be washed once a week or mopped once a week at most, which also makes an argument of having like linoleum sheet vinyl flooring in bathrooms instead of tile and grout. I'm not sure everybody would get behind that as far as construction materials goes. English language not supported. But yeah. So 3 times a week I have it doing stronger vacuums and stronger mopping in different parts of my house. And then every day on top of that, I have it doing a light mopping of the bathrooms and light vacuuming. And I've probably pushed it to a point where I'm not sure it's actually needed, but it seems like it works as good as it's going to. And it is certainly way more cleaning than I was doing before, which was potentially sweeping, mopping once a month at most, the entire house. And so, yeah. My general assumption and hope here is it's picking up just a week's worth of dust and collecting and filtering dust out of the air more than anything else. My modification on the SwitchBot S10 of putting some Velcro stickers on the side isn't working particularly well. Putting Swiffer, half of a Swiffer cloth on the side of where the Velcro things isn't working particularly well. Not because it's not doing what I thought it would do, which is rubbing up against the wall and cleaning out the baseboards a little bit, dusting the baseboards a little bit more. It just falls off a lot. The Velcro stickers I put got dirty very quickly, and the Swiffer just falls off. So I have several times found it just in the floor after it had been knocked off. Now the SwitchBot RoboVac is going to quickly, within probably a year, have some stiff competition and not be the recommendation, as other devices kind of steal the idea of the auto draining and auto feeling concept that the SwitchBot right now is about the only product that does that, as far as having a water station that is directly plumbed into your house. But the SwitchBot's closest competition right now does have a dusting pad that is built in to the side, and by it just being built in by the manufacturer, it is going to actually stay attached, I imagine, a lot better. Now, I could certainly think about a different way to attach the dusters, and we'll probably have to do that. Yeah. This whole process kind of has changed, hasn't it? These whole live streams have changed more than I thought they were going to. Here's one that is another adult game. Why? This should not have shown up at all. It's tagged with sexual content and nudity, so that should have automatically been closed by my curation. But yeah, this whole process a long time ago was me looking at games and actually trying to comment on them. It never was great. I was often saying games just had dark screenshot syndrome, or was boring, or looked like an asset flip. But I was actually making some kind of commentary on it. But I notice here I'm not even talking about it. I'm just mindlessly looking at things and chilling. Maybe that's a more natural way of doing things and just getting things done. I still visually am showing off the games, so there's something to be said there. Here's yet another adult game. What happened there? Why is the curation not working? And I guess I'm in a weird situation now where I'm gonna potentially need to work on the curation and work on finishing Punch Club. That's completely also ignoring just scheduling still. And now that I've pointed it out to myself that I wasn't talking about the games, now I have nothing to talk about. I did, speaking of smart home devices, I guess, install a Zigbee Matter hub that connects to Tuya, but I don't think it really is going to integrate in any way to me ever using Matter. And frankly, I'm not sure I would recommend Matter to anybody that isn't just deep into the Apple infrastructure, and even at that, you're not going to have a great experience. I still very much would recommend being in the Tuya infrastructure and getting cheap Chinese products off of Amazon, that as long as you're just not afraid of some kind of hacking from these cheap Chinese products, which I wouldn't really be concerned about it, frankly. I don't think it's really happening because somebody would have printed a story at this point. And frankly, I don't think it's happening because I don't think these Tuya developers are that good programmers or would know how to hack on it. But yeah, just it's still very much, as far as smart homes, a situation where specialized products like the SwitchBot, to get all the settings and mopping, you have to use the SwitchBot app. Specialized products like a ratio water irrigation system have their own interface, and there's a lot of settings there that can be tweaked, and there's an assumption of actual quality. Now, I am at the point where I potentially suspect things like the Google Nest thermostat and the Ecobee are not doing anywhere as much as they kind of pretend like they're doing. The latest Ecobee in particular also selling itself, the latest Google Nest in particular is selling itself as having AI developed into it, to better automatically adjust your thermostats. In reality, I think most people kind of know how they want their thermostat to react always, and there's perhaps only a slight adjustments you want based on relative humidity settings. So it's getting closer and closer to a situation where you could buy a cheap Tuya thermostat to control a central AC unit, assuming that's actually doable. But yeah, and definitely you are at a standstill with a lot of things, such as gas water heaters, in that if you want that as a smart device at all to get any functionality, you're going to have to use its own custom app. So I do have like 4 or 5 different apps I could jump through. The smart door lock I have is its own custom app right now, but I am at a point where I could replace that with a new Tuya and integrate that. I'm not 100% sure that my smart doorbell, though, is actually working right. I think it might have some glitches in its software and or glitches in the wiring, in that it occasionally gets a short circuit. But yeah, there was this point at one point where the doorbell seemed to ring and nobody was there, but that could have just been somebody that was playing Ding Dong Ditch. That doesn't happen very often to me, but it's possible. I don't think it's ever happened before. But then there also is an element in that the smart doorbell, it doesn't send enough signals out for automation. So if you press, say, the unlock button to unlock the door, if it's not actually connected to a door lock physically, it won't send out a signal to trigger an automation to connect to wirelessly to a door lock. So if I was to buy a Tuya door lock, I can't actually integrate it with the unlock door button in the interface. Not easily. There might be a way around it, but and that's it. Clearly, the future will be you'll put smart door locks that run on batteries to unlock your door, and then wirelessly it might communicate with a video doorbell system if you have such a thing. Um, all it has, though, is a trigger when it detects motion, but it doesn't have a trigger when somebody rings the doorbell. Which, yeah, you definitely would likely want to trigger things based on both actions, not just one. Anyways, I started to say I installed a Zigbee Matter bridge that just connects multiple connections. It's Zigbee, Bluetooth, I think. I don't know if it really means Bluetooth data, though. I never know what they really mean when they say Bluetooth connections. And Thread. It doesn't do Z-Wave, though, so that would be it. But I can't even really recommend Zigbee. I only got it for carton openers, which were only available as Zigbee devices, and clearly should have been Thread devices instead. But yeah, I can't really recommend Zigbee devices at the moment. It might be a case where Zigbee devices get replaced with Thread devices and they start to get cheaper, but right now they are really expensive. It's like 2 or 3 times to buy a Zigbee bulb than it is to buy a Wi-Fi bulb. Logically, if money's no object, you should buy the Thread bulbs, if you can find any, or Zigbee bulbs, over Wi-Fi, so you just have less devices connecting to your Wi-Fi router at the end, in totality there. But since you're buying cheap Tuya devices in the first place, price is almost certainly going to be a consideration. And so we're almost at the end of the show here, and I am just really rambling today. It's been a very rambling thing. Sensor Gaming showed up again. I haven't seen him post anything in a long time. Yeah, here's like a retweet on September 3rd, and then the next thing we see is September 28th. I noticed a lot of comments. I didn't really listen to the video enough as far as this news video to figure out if I agreed with the comments. But a lot of comments said that Dan, the guy who runs, or Daniel, I'm not sure how he goes by, a lot of people said it sounded like he either had gotten some kind of oral surgery or was drunk. A lot of people just assumed it was drunk. Which, yeah, I don't know what to say with that, really. I can say more directly. Let's see if we can actually pull up the comments. How do you pull up the comments after I've done all this? The Fairy Tale 2 says that it's uncensored and will feature fan service, is the name of the video. And a lot of the comments are saying, well, what they really said is that there was no content originally created for Fairy Tale 2 that had to be censored out because they were already pre-censoring themselves after the censorship that happened in Fairy Tale 1. On top of which, several people who seem to be very irate about it seems to think that they also said that there would be no censorship in Fairy Tale 1, and then there was a day 1 patch that censored things. And that is very believable that exactly happened. Yeah, I'm trying to here. So yeah. So yeah, people don't believe them as far as them saying no censorship. It definitely would make more sense for Censored Gaming to find some more content to talk about more consistently, schedule things out, because it is kind of crazy to have nothing come out for a month. But yeah, there's clearly a desire amongst the fairy tale fans that this game not be censored, and they seem to really feel like it is going to be. And they're posting pictures to back it up. Now, noticeably on Twitter, there isn't anything mentioning him sounding like he was drunk, so maybe those comments were only on YouTube. And I guess my general feeling, just to reiterate it, is I want to see censored gaming as a brand succeed, and as part of that, I want to see Dan, the person who at one time had passion and the ability to run censored gaming all by himself, succeed. It seems like a lot of bad things have happened to him, to the point where it seems also like he might just be causing a lot of the problems himself. A major part of it certainly is that affordable housing is just non-existent in the UK, and he lives in the UK. You can't just up and move, but honestly he would probably do a lot better if he could get a job and move to the United States. But he would have to be the editor of something. He needs somebody to finance him and just keep him working. And yeah, so if I had an extra $1 million, I probably would just buy censored gaming and say, this is now going to be a part of a media conglomerate I'm building up. It is also a case, you have to be careful here, in that there isn't always going to be censorship news, and so you probably do need to balance it. It would have made a lot of sense for there to be a counter series of not censored or gameplay comparisons. He certainly could be making content around like Lollipop Chainsaw right now and talking that up and just playing the whole game and making comparison videos. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. I don't know why this one game was opened here. So I did get, as far as tinkering go, I did get the CSS on gaming on Linux to look more like the other pages, but I haven't done the next step of automatically opening all the links, many of which are about games. But in fairness, if we scroll down and look at each of these headlines, not a single one of these games was talked about by any of my other news sources. And inherently that's always going to be the case, is that there's probably a lot of games that are putting out press releases that Komatsu and Video Games Chronicle and GameDeveloper.com are just not getting. Minecraft is getting a really creepy new biome in Mob. That's somewhat big news. But specific focus of GE Proton 9-15 has been released with an important fix for NVIDIA GPUs. Here is the story I talked about earlier as far as Valve/Steam beginning a direct collaboration with Arch Linux. Yep. Inherently, any base form of Linux, getting a major company to support them can skyrocket their relevancy, because there are definitely a lot of forks of Linux that are not really relevant and nobody should really use, and a lot of branches of Linux that don't make a lot of sense, except for in extremely niche ways. Of the Debian-based branches of Linux, Debian Desktop Edition, or the Debian proper, and Ubuntu maybe, and Linux Mint are really the only full-on desktop environment included operating systems worth mentioning, while there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of other Debian-based Linuxes that have some value to it. And if you were going to ask me what flavor of Linux should SteamOS be on, I would definitely have argued that it should have been on Debian-based Linux, which is more common, certainly. But they definitely are approaching everything from the perspective of we want to be able to lock down the operating system to make sure it doesn't just run into those Windows issues of bugs, which, yeah, early in development, SteamOS version 3 is what they're up to right now. It does make a lot of sense to start very constricted, start very walled garden, make sure you have an operating system that is in no way as buggy and open and full of just legacy code and APIs and access like Windows is. Even Microsoft probably should just try and make their own Linux operating system from scratch that's more locked down. Yeah, it is kind of crazy. Microsoft has never really thought about making a alternate product to Windows in any of the years that Windows has not been received well. But yeah, Arch Linux lockdown immutable operating system is the word. It's immutable. Is very appealing for locking down things and not having problems and not getting blue screens of death or having to reinstall operating systems as much. But the lockdown nature also, I'm sure, is very attractive to game developers, which is something they have to focus on, is to convince very narrow-minded, old-fashioned thinking companies like Ubisoft to allow their games to actually work on SteamOS and not install buggy software to prevent it. So yeah, here's what an actual news story looks like. I will say gaming on Linux is not the prettiest of websites. That certainly would be an understatement. You just don't get a thumbnail from the looks of it. Here, let's turn off uBlock Origin and see if that changes anything. Nope, really doesn't. The actual story here just includes no pictures, and there is definitely something to be said for having at least one picture between the headline and the article. But yeah, this is the whole article. Clearly I need to do some more tinkering. First part here is the automated workflow comment, as far as just making it faster and easier to build new versions of Linux, which means development can happen faster, which clearly Valve wants that to be the case, is that they want the Arch Linux that they built SteamOS on, based on, to be as close to the newest version of the Linux kernel. That way it will be as close to the latest version of AMD video card drivers, which are built into the kernel. I think is the best way. It's not really the way to explain it, but that's the best way I can think of to explain it right now. But they want the newest version of the kernel because that means a few more frames potentially per game, and particularly on the Steam Deck, which has to balance battery life. A few more frames might be the difference between a choppy, laggy, inconsistent 25 and a consistent 27 frames per second, which is still a little bit less than 30, but if you're consistently getting 27 versus getting choppy, laggy, inconsistent 25 frames per second, that's going to be very noticeable. Then it's going to use pretty good privacy, that's what PGP stands for, to sign packages with a single signing key instead of how they do it right now, which is one personal key per package. It will not benefit Proton or the anti-cheat situation in any way and is completely unrelated. Interesting. I would have thought eventually it would convince more people to not put in anti-cheat, but apparently not. There is a danger, I think, of a single signing key, so that is just going to be one master key that Arch Linux has, and the way PGP works, there will be a master private key and a master public key, and with the public key, anybody who downloads SteamOS will be able to unlock and verify that the software has been signed correctly, but they won't be able to sign new packages with the public key. You can only sign new packages with the private key, theoretically. Yeah, there might be some kind of backdoor that nobody knows about, but it is open source software, so if there was a backdoor, somebody would have found it probably by now. And it does that with an incredibly large amount of complicated math that is an interesting YouTube explanation video worth watching if you have any interest in that, but I'm not going to try and explain it. I would, if I was an Arch Linux team member or fan, be somewhat concerned about Valve just completely steamrolling them and taking over. But generally in Linux projects, I think most people would rather their project succeed, or they should at least rather their project succeeds, instead of being concerned about maintaining control. There is, unfortunately, a lot of people who are just obsessed with maintaining control. And it's not like Arch Linux is going to lead completely into only being SteamOS. So for the other projects, which I think Fedora is one of them, those will still be around, but it might just become less and less relevant to install Fedora over just installing SteamOS. It would be kind of weird, certainly though, if you're in a professional environment and then you're just installing SteamOS on your email servers, but in that case you might not be even installing Fedora. You might just be installing a very simplistic console-based version of Arch Linux. Right now, if I had time to work on it, the Linux operating systems I would focus on would be SteamOS once it actually becomes more open that you could install it on other PCs to the point where you'd be dual booting SteamOS and maybe Windows 11 just in case as a backup, and TrueNAS scale, and that's just for my network attached storages. And those are the two Linux operating systems I would put my focus on right now. One for desktops, one for servers. Noticeably here, that is also ignoring several other operating systems I've tried to build and use in the past decade and a half, such as Debian, CentOS, Linux Mint. And I've installed those several times, but never really got to a finalized point where I'm happy with it. Yeah. Well, this has been a very rambly stream, to say the least. and I can't really do anything more about it. So I'll just say that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.